Okay, so the way I look at it, if cybersecurity is about stopping the wrong people from getting access to your data, then data protection and governance is about stopping the right people from doing the wrong thing with your data. So that could be anything from stopping people from inadvertently sharing sensitive data outside your organization. It could be making sure that sensitive files are encrypted and can't be forwarded. Or it could be lifecycle management. It could be making sure that you're only keeping things for as long as you need to. This is going to affect every organization to some extent. So some organizations are more heavily regulated than others, but every organization looks after some sensitive data, HR data, for example. So everyone needs to be thinking about data protection and governance. Well, the biggest problem is usually what we call dark data. So that's data that's unstructured, it's files and emails. There's no clear ownership. There's no organizational understanding of what it is, where it is. In other words, it's probably sat in a file share somewhere. And really, if you don't understand what data you're storing, then how can you manage it effectively? How can you make sure that you're retaining the stuff that you need to retain? And probably even more importantly, deleting the stuff that you're obliged to delete. Yeah, there was the storage is cheap, why can't we just keep everything forever argument. To be clear, that was never a good idea, but we are seeing better recognition of that now. And I think the main reason behind that is an increasing focus on privacy, increasing awareness of our obligations around data privacy. Regulations like GDPR obviously have a part to play in that. So there's a few points to think about here. So first one, storage is cheap. Storage really isn't that cheap anymore. So the volume of data that organizations are storing is growing exponentially. Robust cloud storage can cost you a significant amount of money. So anyone who's pricing up additional storage for Microsoft 365, for SharePoint Online, or sizing disks for virtual machines in Azure, you're going to know storage isn't cheap anymore. The next thing to think about is data quality. So your users are searching files and emails to find relevant information. So you might even be looking at AI tools, things like Copilot for Microsoft 365, to boost your productivity. If you're storing information that's out of date, inaccurate, duplicated, potentially litigious, whatever it might be, you're not going to get good results from that search or from that AI platform. So in other words, your signal to noise ratio is going to be poor. So keeping only what you really need to keep can boost effectiveness there. Final point to think about here would be your responsibilities and risks. So every piece of sensitive information that you're storing comes with a responsibility. It's on you to make sure that you're managing it properly. It also carries a risk. Every piece of information carries a risk. There's a risk that if you suffer a data leak or a security breach, that information is going to be exposed. By only keeping what you need to, you're managing that risk, you're minimizing that risk. So that's probably going to depend on the size of your organization. So if you're in a large organization, you've typically got dedicated people or teams who are trained and who have expertise in compliance in regulatory issues. That's typically distinct from IT operations or IT leadership. In smaller organizations, it's probably more fluid. So it's typically going to fall to the execs or to leaders of teams who have specific data protection requirements. So usually you've got HR teams, you've got finance teams. They're both storing specific types of sensitive data that need to be managed, that need to be retained, or need to be deleted after a specified period. I think my key message will probably be, don't just assume that IT will take care of it. So your IT team, They're good at making sure that you've got storage available, that information is stored securely, that everything's backed up and so on. But they're not necessarily the people who are going to know what information is sensitive and what information isn't, or what information you need to keep and for how long, and what information you need to delete and so on, if that makes sense. I think to some extent, you've just got to take your medicine on this one. So the chances are, if you are still keeping absolutely everything, your data storage is going to be growing exponentially. So this problem is just going to get harder and harder to tackle. So start somewhere. It's always going to be an ongoing process rather than an overnight task. And there are tools that can help. So in Microsoft Purview, we can set up rules to pinpoint sensitive content. We can trawl your SharePoint sites, your OneDrives, find out where you're storing the content that needs to be managed. We can also look at broader data governance capabilities, identifying dormant content that can potentially be deleted, and so on. So there are tools that can help. Okay, so the first step really has to be building an understanding of what you're storing and where. So Microsoft call this know your data. Classification has got a big part to play here. So if we're getting our users to label content based on sensitivity, and we're then reporting on where that label is showing up, then we're starting to build that picture of, okay, where are we storing what types of sensitive information? So there are some automation approaches we can bring to bear on that as well. So that discovery phase really is key to start building that picture, building that understanding of where your sensitive information is. Once you've got a good understanding, or a growing understanding of what you're storing and where, then you can start introducing protection and prevention. So protection is about looking at those files and emails, or the SharePoint sites and teams that contain sensitive information, and putting additional protections in place. So that could be things like encryption, rights management on files and emails, additional access constraints on SharePoint sites and teams. On the prevention side of things, this is about preventing data leaks. So detecting when sensitive information is being shared inappropriately, when someone might be sharing a file with someone from outside the organization, and putting controls in place to stop that. So this is all about data loss prevention, or DLP, and insider risk management. We'd also want to introduce some data governance. So making sure that you're keeping the information that needs to be kept and deleting the content that needs to be deleted and so on. I think the first thing is have some clear accountability for data protection governance in your organization. So make sure everyone's clear on their responsibilities, who's responsible for what. Secondly, let's make sure that the policy leads to technology. It should always be that way around. So get your information classification policies, your data handling policies, get them right on paper, and let that guide the technology. On the technology side of things, I think the first thing to do is to make sure that you're following some sound information management practices. So organizing information based on who owns it and who needs what level of access to it. So every piece of information you're storing should have an owner. So that's the person who is responsible for making sure that it's accurate, up to date, not duplicated, not out of date, not litigious and so on. If a piece of information doesn't have an owner, then why are you keeping it? Next, I'd say consolidate your file storage. So we're Microsoft Cloud specialists, so we're obviously going to favor Microsoft 365. But if you can move your file share content into OneDrive for Business, into SharePoint Online, into Teams, you've then got far more tools available to you to manage and govern that content effectively. So once you've done all that, then you're really into that discover phase. So at that point, you're looking at figuring out what information you're storing where, introducing classification to support that and so on. Okay, so if you're storing files and emails in Microsoft 365, you've already got access to a really solid set of tools. So Microsoft Purview gives you a fairly broad suite of compliance tools. It covers things like information classification, information protection with rights management, data loss prevention, insider risk management, lifecycle management, and so on. And depending on your license level, you're going to get different versions of these tools. So at Business Premium or E3, you've got the core versions. So you can classify based on sensitivity manually. You can apply retention labels, create retention policies, create basic DLP policies and so on. And then E5 steps that up and gives you a really advanced set of capabilities in the same areas. You've also got access to Microsoft Priva, which is priced as an add-on, and that gives you access to some more specialized focus tools around privacy management and processing subject access requests. Okay, so AI is obviously the hot topic everywhere in tech at the moment. It does have a role to play. So in Purview, we've got things like trainable classifiers. So these are machine learning algorithms that we train to recognize specific types of sensitive content that can come in different formats. So things like invoices or CVs. So we can recognize them. We can then use that to classify them and label them and make sure they're protected appropriately. Credit card details are actually much easier than things like CVs and invoices. So a credit card number is very predictable. It's always 16 digits. It conforms to a checksum. It conforms to the Loon algorithm. You've usually got some supporting information near it, so it will usually come with an expiration date as well. So simple pattern matching using something called sensitive information types is usually enough for that. Things like CVs, invoices, contracts, they're actually more challenging because you haven't got those same predictable patterns. They can come in all kinds of different formats. If you think about the number of CVs you've seen and the different ways they're presented, the different ways they're laid out, that needs a more flexible approach, and that's where that machine learning approach comes in, where you're basically showing it several hundred examples of a CV, so it learns to recognize CVs in different formats, and you're using that to recognize and classify that content. Okay, so I wouldn't say Copilot can help with data governance. I think data governance can help with Copilot. So if you're rolling out a generative AI tool, so Copilot for Microsoft 365, it's drawing on all the data you've got access to from across Microsoft 365 and anything else that you've connected to it. You're going to get better responses from Copilot if the data that you're storing is accurate and not duplicated and it's up to date and so on. So for example, if I ask Copilot a question about annual leave entitlements, but in SharePoint I'm storing 4 different versions of our annual leave policy, Copilot's not going to know what to do with that. Chances are we're going to get some bad advice. So getting data governance right definitely has a role to play in getting ready to make the most of tools like Copilot. So this is a little bit subjective, but my advice would be focus on information ownership. So start building that culture of every piece of information should have an owner, and start shifting your mindset from keep everything forever to do we have a good reason for keeping this piece of information? If not, delete it. We did run a webinar, so it's called Solving Data Protection and Governance Challenges with Microsoft 365. It takes you through common data protection and governance challenges and how we map different elements of Purview and Priva to meeting those challenges. Thanks very much.